subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories, hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching. The stagecoach kicked up dust as it disappeared over the ridge, leaving nothing behind but silence and the crumpled form of a woman lying face down in the red Montana dirt. Her blue calico dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing bruises that painted her skin in shades of purple and yellow. Her hands were scraped raw from where she had tried to break her fall when they pushed her out. Evangeline Shaw did not move for a long time. She simply lay there, tasting dirt and blood, wondering if this was where her life would end. 23 years old, 600 miles from anyone who might have cared about her, and thrown away like garbage by the man who had promised to marry her. The advertisement had seemed like salvation. Prosperous rancher seeks educated, gentle woman for wife. Must be willing to travel to Montana territory. Good home guaranteed. There had been no good home. There had only been Marcus Whitley, a cruel man with cold eyes who had taken one look at her thin frame and declared her unfit for the hard work of ranching. He had backhanded her across the face before they even reached his property. For 3 days she had endured his fists, his boots, his terrible words. And when he decided she was more trouble than she was worth, he had loaded her onto the stagecoach with instructions to the driver to dump her somewhere nobody would find her. The driver had done exactly that. Evangeline forced herself to breathe. In, out, slow and steady. She had survived worse things than this. She had survived the orphanage in Philadelphia. She had survived being a governess for families who treated her like a servant. She had survived the death of every dream she had ever held. She would survive this too, with tremendous effort. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. The world spun around her, and she vomited into the dirt. Her ribs screamed with every movement, and she suspected at least 2 were cracked. But she got to her feet. She stood swaying in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but grass and sky and distant mountains that looked like they might swallow the world. She had no food, no water, no money, nothing but the ruined dress on her back and the determination that had carried her through every dark moment of her life. Evangeline began to walk. She walked until the sun climbed high and beat down on her uncovered head. She walked until her lips cracked and her throat burned with thirst. She walked until her legs gave out, and she collapsed beside a small creek, plunging her face into the cool water and drinking until she thought she might burst. She did not know how long she lay there by the water. Time had lost all meaning. The shadows grew longer, and the temperature began to drop, and she knew with terrible certainty that she would not survive the night. Not out here, not alone, not in her condition. That was when she heard the footsteps, heavy boots crunching through the grass, the soft whicker of a horse, a deep voice speaking words she could not quite make out. Evangeline tried to get up, tried to run, tried to do anything to protect herself, but her body had given everything it had. She could only lie there trembling, waiting for whatever new horror was about to find her. The footsteps stopped. She heard a sharp intake of breath, and then a man's face appeared above her, blocking out the fading sun. He had a thick beard the color of autumn leaves, and eyes so dark they were almost black. His face was weathered and lined, the face of someone who had spent his life outdoors. He was big, bigger than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the sky. For a long moment he simply stared at her. She watched his expression change as he took in her bruises, her torn dress, her broken condition. Something shifted in those dark eyes, something that looked almost like pain. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, like stones tumbling down a mountainside. "Who did this to you?" Evangeline opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out, only a dry, rasping sound that barely qualified as human. The man dropped to his knees beside her. Up close, she could see that his hands were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for his living. But when he reached out to touch her face, his fingers were impossibly gentle. "Easy now," he murmured. "Easy. "I am not going to hurt you. My name is Josiah Blackwood. I have a cabin about 2 miles from here. I can help you if you will let me." She should have been afraid. Every experience she had ever had with men told her she should be terrified. But there was something in his eyes, something in the way he touched her like she was made of precious glass, that made her feel safe for the first time in weeks. "Please," she whispered. It was the only word she could manage. Josiah nodded once, decisively. Then he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled like pine and wood fire and something uniquely masculine. Without asking permission, he slid his arms beneath her and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Come with me," he said. Evangeline closed her eyes and let herself be carried. She woke in a bed, a real bed, with a thick mattress and soft blankets and a pillow that cradled her head like a cloud. For a moment she was certain she had died and somehow stumbled into heaven. Then the pain hit her, and she remembered everything. She was in a small cabin, simple but clean. Firelight danced on the walls, casting warm shadows over rough-hewn furniture and shelves lined with books. So many books. More books than she had seen since leaving Philadelphia. Josiah was sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. In his hands was a bowl of something that steamed and smelled like the most delicious thing she had ever encountered. "Broth," he said simply. "You need to eat." He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back with surprising tenderness. Then he held the bowl to her lips and fed her, spoonful by spoonful, never rushing, never showing any impatience. When the bowl was empty, he set it aside and studied her face. "Your ribs are cracked," he said. "I wrapped them while you were sleeping. I hope you do not mind." I tried to be respectful. Evangeline realized for the first time that she was wearing a different dress. Clean cotton, soft with age, far too big for her. One of his shirts, perhaps. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded. "The bruises will heal. The cuts on your hands, I cleaned and bandaged. You will need to rest for at least a week, maybe more." She felt tears prick at her eyes. This stranger, this mountain man she had never met before, was showing her more kindness than anyone had in years. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Josiah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that sounded like old grief. "Because once, a long time ago, someone should have helped my mother, and no one did." He did not elaborate, and she did not ask. Over the next few weeks, Evangeline healed. Her ribs mended. Her bruises faded from purple to green to yellow to nothing. The cuts on her hands became scars that would tell their own story. And somewhere along the way, she began to know Josiah Blackwood. He had come to the mountains 15 years ago, he told her, to escape a world that had given him nothing but pain. He trapped in the winters and sold furs in the summer. He grew vegetables in a small garden behind the cabin. He read every book he could get his hands on, everything from philosophy to poetry to dime novels that made him shake his head and laugh. He laughed often, she discovered, not loud, booming laughter, but quiet chuckles that seemed to rumble up from somewhere deep in his chest. He laughed at his own mistakes, at the antics of the squirrels that raided his garden, at the dry observations she sometimes made when she forgot to be afraid. He never asked about Marcus Whitley. He never asked what had brought her to Montana or why. She had been lying half dead by a creek. He simply accepted her presence in his home as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But she told him anyway. One night, sitting by the fire while a storm raged outside, she told him everything. The orphanage, the cruel families she had worked for, the desperate hope that had made her answer that advertisement, the nightmare that had followed. Josiah listened without interrupting. When she finished, when she was crying so hard she could barely breathe, he did something she would never forget. He crossed the room, sat down beside her, and pulled her into his arms. He held her while she wept. He held her while the storm howled and the fire crackled and the world outside disappeared. He held her until she had no tears left, and then he held her a little longer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You deserved none of that," he said. "None of it. You are the bravest woman I have ever known, Evangeline Shaw. And if you want to stay here, if you want to make this cabin your home, then I would be honored to have you." She pulled back to look at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none, only sincerity and something else. Something that looked remarkably like love. "I have nothing to offer you," she whispered. Josiah shook his head slowly. "You have everything to offer. Your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. The way you hum when you think no one is listening. The way you always save the best bits of dinner for that stray cat that comes around. The way you look at the mountains in the morning like you are seeing God himself." Evangeline stared at him. "You notice all of that?" A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "I notice everything about you. I have since the moment I found you." She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not careful or tentative or proper. It was a kiss that carried with it every ounce of longing she had ever felt, every dream she had thought was dead, every hope that had refused to die no matter how many times the world had tried to kill it. Josiah kissed her back with equal fervor, his rough hands cradling her face like she was the most precious thing he had ever touched. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Evangeline. I have loved you since you opened your eyes by that creek and looked at me like I might be your salvation. And I have loved you more every single day since—" Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she said. They were married in the spring, in a meadow filled with wildflowers, with only the mountains and the sky as witnesses. Josiah had carved their wedding rings himself, from wood he had harvested on the day he found her. He said it seemed fitting that their marriage would be built on the same foundation as their meeting. That first year was not easy. Life in the mountains never was. There were storms that buried the cabin in snow for weeks at a time. There were lean months when food was scarce and they had to stretch every morsel. There were moments when Evangeline woke screaming from nightmares about Marcus Whitley, and Josiah would hold her until the shaking stopped. But there was also joy. So much joy. There were mornings when they would sit on the porch together, watching the sun rise over the peaks, not speaking because words were unnecessary. There were nights when they would read to each other by firelight, taking turns with the poetry and the philosophy in those dime novels that made them both laugh. There were moments of passion so intense that Evangeline thought her heart might burst from the fullness of it. And then there was Rebecca. She came into the world on a cold November morning, announcing her arrival with a cry that seemed to shake the very walls of the cabin. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, and from the first moment Evangeline held her, she knew that every terrible thing that had ever happened to her had been worth it, because every terrible thing had led her here, to this cabin, to this man, to this perfect, squalling, miraculous child. Josiah wept when he held his daughter for the first time, great silent tears that rolled down into his beard as he cradled her against his massive chest. "Thank you," he whispered to Evangeline. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for her." Evangeline smiled through her own tears. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing me when I was nothing but broken pieces. Thank you for helping me put myself back together." Years passed. Rebecca grew from a baby into a toddler, into a girl with wild curls and an even wilder spirit. She learned to read from her parents' books, to trap from her father, to cook from her mother. She grew up knowing nothing of cruelty or fear, only the warmth of a home filled with love. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Evangeline would stand on the porch of the cabin she had made her own and look out at the mountains that had saved her life. She would think about the terrified woman who had been dumped in the dirt all those years ago, and she would marvel at how far she had come. She had been broken. She had been beaten. She'd been left for dead in the middle of nowhere, with nothing and no one to help her. But a mountain man with gentle hands and dark eyes had found her. He had lifted her up, carried her home, and loved her with a fierceness that still took her breath away. He had said 3 simple words that had changed everything. "Come with me." And she had. She had followed him into the mountains, into his life, into a future she had never dared to dream about. She had followed him all the way to happiness. One evening, as the sun set behind the peaks and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Josiah came to stand beside her on the porch. He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close, and she leaned into him the way she always did. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Evangeline smiled. "I am thinking about how grateful I am for this life, for Rebecca, for you, for all of it." Josiah pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I am the grateful one. Every day I wake up amazed that you are here, that you chose to stay with a rough old mountain man when you could have had anyone." She turned to look at him, at this man who had given her everything, and felt her heart overflow with love. "There was never anyone else," she said. "There was only ever you." And as the last light of day faded behind the mountains, Josiah Blackwood kissed his wife with all the tenderness and passion of that first night so many years ago. Some loves are quiet, some are gentle, some are born of convenience or practicality or simple need. But some loves are forged in fire. They are born of pain and shaped by courage, and tempered by the kind of devotion that refuses to break. That was the love between Evangeline and Josiah, a love that had begun in the dirt and risen to the heavens, a love that had taken 2 broken people and made them whole, a love that would last until the mountains themselves crumbled into dust. And that love, born on a terrible day, when a beaten woman was left to die, would echo through generations. It would be told around firesides and whispered to children, and remembered long after both of them were gone. Because true love never truly dies. It lives on in the hearts of those who witnessed it, in the lives of those it created, in the very air of the places where it flourished, and in a small cabin in the Montana mountains, where a mail-order bride had found her forever home. That love would live forever.